We see the headlines about massive lawsuits and market monopolies, but we rarely see the actual mechanics of how they're being fought. This is Econ Works. We look past the talking points to find where law, economics, and markets actually collide. Let's get into it.
Picture a high-stakes antitrust courtroom. It's just thick with complex economic data. Now, what if one of the sharpest analytical minds in that room wasn't even a person, but an AI? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into a pretty amazing experiment that puts that exact idea to the test. You know, you might think of a court case as this search for a single hard fact, the smoking gun. But in the world of modern antitrust law, it's just not that simple anymore. It's become less about raw data and more about which side's expert economist can spin the most persuasive story for the judge. And that creates a huge problem. You've got two highly paid experts, right? Each one is using these super sophisticated models to talk about things like market definition and competitive harm. They are literally telling two completely different stories based on the same set of facts. So how on earth is a judge, who's a legal expert, not an economist, supposed to figure out which story is the right one? That's the big question we're digging into today. To really get why this is such a big deal, we need to take a closer look at the specific challenges that judges are facing in these massive cases. It really just boils down to three big things. First, you've got subjectivity. It's one expert's opinion against another's. Then there's bias. Human judgment can be swayed by personal beliefs, maybe even outside pressure. And finally, there's just the sheer complexity of it all. The amount of data and the economic models involved. It's a mountain of information to get through. So, with all those challenges on the table, this experiment does something really interesting. It introduces a brand new player into the game, artificial intelligence. But not as a judge, as a critic. The traditional courtroom setup is basically a duel, right? You've got expert A versus expert B, and the judge is in the middle trying to decide who wins. This experiment suggests a totally different workflow. You still have those dueling experts, but now you add a new step. You let an AI analyze and critique their arguments, and then you compare that critique to what the court actually decided. And let's be absolutely clear about the goal here. This is not about replacing human judges. Not at all. It's about creating a really structured way to compare the arguments side by side. The AI's critique acts like a neutral, third-party analysis that we can then measure against the court's own thinking. So think of it as an AI-augmented approach, not an AI-led one. So what is this AI actually doing? How does it think about these incredibly complicated economic arguments? Let's break that down. Okay, this is probably the most important point to understand. The AI is not a fact checker. You feed it all the inputs, the data, the expert models, the reports, and what it does is perform a critique. It's scanning for logical gaps, for inconsistencies, for bias in the reasoning itself. So the output isn't, hey, this side is right. It's more like a report card, listing the strengths and the vulnerabilities in how an argument is built. And this is really where these models just shine. They are incredibly good at spotting when an argument contradicts itself. Or, when an expert might be cherry-picking data to support their point, that's what we call selection bias. They can test the logical flow from A to B to C and even compare claims across a whole bunch of different documents to see if everything lines up. But, and this is just as important, we have to talk about what it can't do. An AI can't just invent new evidence out of thin air. It can't look a witness in the eye and decide if they're telling the truth. It has zero capacity for actual legal judgment. And this is a big one. It can only analyze information that's publicly available, unlike the courts, which get to see all kinds of confidential data. So, how do they actually test this thing? Well, the researchers developed this really clean, really clever 4-step process to put the AI's critique to the test against the real world. It's a beautifully simple idea. First, you take an actual expert report from a real-life antitrust case. Step 2, you have the AI go to town on it, critiquing the economic reasoning. Third, you pull up the court's final decision and look at the reasoning the judge adopted. And then, the final step, you do an alignment test. Did the AI's critique flag the same issues that the court also found to be critical? And the result of that whole process is what you're seeing here, an AI versus court scorecard. It gives you this really structured way to compare everything. For each key argument in the case, like how you define the market or what the competitive effects are, you can see the AI's assessment of that argument, and then you can see if the court ended up accepting it, considering it, or just ignoring it completely. So this is a super fascinating academic exercise for sure. But what about the real world? Why does an experiment like this actually matter? And let's be totally 100% clear about this. The point here is not to build some kind of crystal ball that predicts who's going to win a court case. This is about something way more fundamental. It's about finding a structured way to evaluate how these economic arguments are built and stress tested in the first place, and to see if an AI spots the same weak points that a human judge does. You know, when you get right down to it, this experiment isn't just about the AI's capabilities, it's about our own. The biggest challenge with using AI for really complex stuff is knowing how to ask the right questions. This whole process is designed to give us some real practical experience in doing just that, using AI as a tool to make these impossibly complex topics just a little bit more understandable. Which, brings us right back to that simple but really powerful question that started this whole project. Can AI actually provide a meaningful critique of these arguments? Well, this experiment doesn't give us a final yes or no, but it gives us a brand new framework for trying to find the answer. And maybe, just maybe, a little glimpse into the future of the courtroom.
Thanks for watching. For the deep dive economic analysis behind these stories, join us at econworks.com. Subscribe to stay informed on where law and economics meet the market. We'll see you in the next episode.